to leave, you may. And if you need to cry in the open, you also may. On a cool night in the summer of 2019, I sat down beside my old gaming PC to prepare for what I thought would be a very normal conversation. A few weeks earlier, I had met a woman in an online community and had agreed to run a game for her. What exactly that means, well, if you don't know, you don't know. Suffice it to say, I'd done this quite a lot, and I wasn't expecting much fanfare. 7.5 hours later, I stumbled onto the deck of my parents' home, eyes dry and red, and watched the sun rise. I had, over that bleak marathon, been given fragments of a story I would come to know all too well. A story that subsumed me, a story that broke me. Even in that moment, so early in what was to come, I realized that something had changed and that I would never be the same again. A straight and fearsome line from that deck in California to an early morning at Ronald Reagan International Airport in December of 2021, where I stumbled to the front of the check-in line. The woman at the counter handed me what would become a one-way ticket to SeaTac, an airport I'd never visited in a city I'd never seen. She commented on my lack of luggage, but otherwise let me be. We live in a beautiful world, a challenging one, a delicate one. In the course of our lives, we encounter things and people that bring us great joy and meaning, that fill our lives with light and love. And in the same course, those things that mean so much to us come to an end. It is the way of things, whether we wish it to be or not. That thing, loss, it is one of the great questions of the human condition, how to cope with the end of things. And try as we might, through countless thousands of years of philosophy, storytelling, spirituality, history, science, medicine, it remains a profoundly vexing question. Because what do you do? What do you do if you lose a spouse or a child or a parent? If your home is destroyed, your hometown razed, your country and your culture and your very way of life ripped to bloody ribbons in front of you? How are you supposed to go on? Of course, our society has ideas about this. What's the classic American story? Something like this, perhaps. The loss hits you, and goodness, it's sad. You cry and you weep and you wail. Maybe you have a funeral, and there's a time when everyone goes up to you and says, "My God, how awful. Is there anything I can do?" Take a day, a week, a month off work. Whatever you need. You grieve for a time, and it hurts like hell at first, but eventually the pain fades, and you get over it and return to normal life. But what if someone doesn't get better? What if grief fills their hearts and never leaves? What if 6 months, a year, 2 years, 10 years from now, they still live with that deep well of sadness from which they draw tears? Well, in the American telling, that means there's something wrong with you. Somehow you haven't gotten over it, and you need to be pulled free. You need to move on. Because grief is a journey, a hero's journey even, where the protagonist comes back to the normal world stronger and better than ever before. Oh, how many grieving people have been told that their loss was just a lesson, that it'll make them better in the long run, that they needed to experience tragedy even, because it made them the good person they are today. Never mind that other people get to be happy without having their life torn apart. The suffering makes you strong. Pain is weakness leaving the body. Chances are most of you have experienced this story as listener or teller, especially since Florence is a grayer crowd than most. And I think my tone sufficiently conveys the contempt I have for this story. I have seen what grief can do to a person. The woman I met in 2019, I came to know her very intimately. We shared an apartment and a bed for over a year. Her torment is not mine to tell, but even if it was, I would fail in the attempt, for it is beyond telling. Before I met her, I didn't know what a PTSD flashback looked like. I didn't know what not sleeping for 3 weeks did to a person. or that a professional musician could be so racked with guilt that they became unable to play their instruments. There is a medical condition known as prolonged grief disorder, among other things, where a person's grief is so severe for such a long period of time that it interferes with their ability to function or create new relationships. For these people, as many as 1 in 10 who experience loss, grief is not something that goes away or dims in its intensity. It lives within them, sometimes for years, sometimes decades, sometimes until the end of their days. But we don't need the DSM to realize this. Not if we think for a moment about what grief is and why we experience it. Grief and loss take many forms. The death of someone we love often takes center stage, but we can grieve for the loss of almost anything. The loss of a relationship, a divorce or otherwise. The loss of a home in which we felt safe, or a career that made us feel powerful and fulfilled. The loss of place, of being kicked out of a city or country and forced to live in places foreign to us. The loss of safety as the world becomes more dangerous or we become more aware of our own mortality. We can grieve the loss of capacity. Losing a limb or a sense can profoundly alter what we are capable of or make it much more difficult. Losing excellence in a skill we cared about deeply or took great pride in. Being grasped by chronic pain and losing the ability to go about the world with ease, or some other medical condition that steals options away from us. Loss of energy, loss of memory, a realization that the things we could once do easily are now dangerous or impossible. We can grieve more abstractly. We can grieve for our optimism of the future, or our sense that the world is a just place. We can grieve for the way our country used to be, or was supposed to be. A loss of nature, a loss of rights, a loss of faith in the inherent goodness of others, or competence, or our own goodness and competence. A realization that the world we lived in was a lie, and thus losing our very sense of self as it once fit into a now illusory world. And we can grieve for things that did not happen. Grief at our own missed decisions. What if we decided to have children, or decided not to? What if we had gotten that degree, or applied for that job, or stayed together with that one who got away? If we had moved to that other city, or that other country, or had stayed where we were? Grief for a polity if a different party had won an election, or a revolution, or if a war had not broken out, or a pandemic not been ignored. Grief for the ghost of a lost future that could have been, but was chosen against by more powerful men than we. There is a type of grief shared by many trans people who transition in adulthood. We grieve for our lost childhood. Not all feel this way, but those that do mourn the fact that they didn't get to grow up in the right gender. I feel this grief. I can be a woman, but I can never be a girl. And who knows? If I transitioned at 5, maybe I would have fallen into social circles that affirmed who I was rather than graded against it. Maybe I wouldn't have spent over a decade being friends with someone who hit me so regularly I stopped taking notice of it. A hypothetical I'll never know, but I'll be reminded of that pain every time I hear a pair of girls laughing and wonder if it could have been me. When we form a bond with a person, a place, a community, an idea, whatever it might be, we enmesh some part of that thing with some part of ourselves. As we come to know them, our brain forms a mental model of what that person or thing is and how they fit into our lives. We come to remember things about them, their face, their smile, their laugh, what they stood for and what they couldn't stand, their favorite color, their favorite coffee shop, a trail through the forest they always loved to take. In a very real way, the act of knowing and caring about someone physically alters the structure of our brains, our neurons and synaptic connections, that they become a physical part of ourselves, something as real to our bodies as a limb or an eye. And then they die, they disappear. But that physical piece of them in us, it remains. It remains, but now it's attached to this horrible pain, this grief of all of those wonderful things we shared with them that are gone. And the more we know and love this person, the wider the tendrils of that grief reach into our bodies. Until one day, 2 years after your spouse passed, you're at the grocery store and you see the exact brick of Tillamook sharp white cheddar that they always bought for their afternoon snacks. From the cheddar to the person, from the person to the yawning chasm of their loss, and now you're weeping like an infant in the dairy aisle. Our society loves to frame grief as a journey. The only problem is that loss is permanent. Death and a divorce are the course of history, the decisions you made when you were young and the health problems you accrued when you were old. Even if it's about something temporary, even if you believe you will reunite with your child in the gardens of Jana, still you will lose the years you would have shared on this world. If your wife was a scientist and she'd gotten a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but following it would mean she'd be stuck on a research station in Antarctica for 5 years, would not those 5 years still be lost even after she came back? The 777, packed with holiday travelers, carried me into the sky. A few days later, I was in Florence, in my mother's new house that was neither of our homes, in a room that wasn't mine, looking through a closet I'd never opened, containing all the things I'd left behind when I'd left an exploding household with a backpack and 3 changes of clothes. I was desperate, I remember. I was looking for something from before. I'd lost all my friends, had been exiled from my hometown and state, become estranged from most of my family, had lost my optimism, lost my health, lost at least part of my mind. I'd been curled up on a bed in a room with blackout curtains over every window, surrounded by nothing my own, doing nothing I used to do, tiptoeing around every word in every sentence so I didn't run afoul of one trigger or another. My skin was pale from the lack of sun. My skin had never been pale. I sought what I was looking for almost by instinct. My old computer, a 70-pound Leviathan my now estranged father bought me when I was 16. A top-of-the-line gaming PC at the time. It had been with me my entire adult life. I wrote my first novel on it, and my second. I got my computer science degree on it, played and developed games on it, made friends and created a community through it, had carried its heavy steel frame up and down stairs as I moved apartments during college, had put my feet on top of it, as I read books on history and economics and sociology and war. Thousands and thousands of hours. A life, meager though it was. Since I was 4, I'd never been away from a computer for more than a week or 2. Until I knew there was nothing precious on it. Everything I cared about was backed up remotely or could be downloaded anew without difficulty. But to press the little gray alien that served as its power button, hear the fans spin up and watch the BIOS flicker across the monitors, to do something on it to affirm that I was real, that I was a person with a past who cared about something my not yet ex would never bat an eye at, that after everything else was gone, there was still something left of me. So I pressed the power button, and nothing happened. Again and again, I performed the familiar motions to pop off the case. All the circuit boards were covered in dust, that thick kind that sticks to things. But they've been like that for years, right? I'd always meant to airbrush them off at some point. Surely there was still time. I searched through its innards listlessly, checked the SATA cables and the motherboard to see if the RAM had been knocked loose, see if I could do something to fix it, to fix my baby. But I couldn't, because she was dead. She was dead, and there was nothing I could do. And so I slipped the case back on and rested my head on the hard black plastic, and I wept because it was gone. Everything was gone. I took out the hard drives because I could do that much. I don't know if they still work, but I still have them because they still have a part of me on them. A version of me that is so dead, not even his name or his gender remains. There's still a part of me that lives in that horrible apartment filled with things that weren't mine, where I wasn't allowed to use the kitchen equipment and was too scared of damaging something to clear off a table, listening to a woman screaming who will always be the person I shared my first sexual experience with, an experience that made her cry. And there is still a part of me that tried to kill myself when I was 7, still a part of me that took 2.5 years to walk through a door because I was scared out of my mind that going in would make somebody angry. And there will always be a part of me sitting on a bench in the Viscalini Ranch in Cambria, California, looking out over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the wind in my hair, the grass billowing all around me, as I look over at the empty space on the weather-worn wood and wish desperately for someone to sit beside me and hold my hand. I don't say these things to put importance on my own loss, for it is immaterial to the workings of the world. Instead, I hold my hands out and show my scars in public that others will realize they aren't alone, that there are those who still mourn for loss years, decades old, who were forever changed by what they experienced. I do this to demonstrate to people that they need not be ashamed, that they need not feel themselves weak or broken for not getting over it. I do this to assert that it must be okay that we're not okay. Which is not to say I think we should despair or consign ourselves to misery forever. Quite the opposite. I speak about this precisely because we must figure out how to keep going, to live and find hope and joy and meaning in the world that follows. For those of you who've managed to get over it in the American sense, I'm happy for you. I'm happy that whatever things you did or support you got worked for you, and that the past no longer burdens you. But your experience isn't universal, any more than mine is, any more than anyone's is. Our society does not prepare us to cope with loss, in ourselves or others. Instead, it seeks to obscure it, pushing out of the spotlight those who are in pain, for whom the classic narratives don't fit. And it does this through the actions of good and well-meaning people trying to help, who end up pushing away those whose suffering is not immediately legible, or whose mourning is not familiar. I've stolen a metaphor from Megan Devine, that of a garden. As life occurs to us, it scatters seeds into the loam of our soul, and over time, plants begin to flourish within it. By picking which to nurture and which to remove, we create an arrangement, a garden that is the embodiment of our innermost selves. A garden is a delicate place. If left to its own devices, nature will reclaim it and return us to wilderness. To cultivate the self we wish to be, we must constantly be among the flora, weeding, pruning, watering, tending to the salinity and alkalinity of the soil, watching for pests, keeping a close eye on the whims of the weather. With enough care, the things we care about most deeply can become vast bushes or towering trees whose roots and branches span the expanse of our garden. And then something happens. A tree falls in a great storm. The descending trunk crashes down on things below, the roots uprooting from the ground. And like that, everything changes. With the tree gone, the canopy opens up and the growing conditions for every plant in the garden are altered. The fallen log is too heavy to move with our bodies and becomes a permanent feature of the landscape. The soil changes, the mycelial networks change, and whatever roots or suckers that remain from the fallen tree continue to wend their way through the soil, trying desperately to return to the sun. Even if you could remove the log and all its leavings, the absence of the tree will still change what's possible, and it will take a lifetime for one to grow in its place. The garden is wounded, indeed is forever changed, but that doesn't mean it's doomed. New flowers and bushes can be planted in the space around their crushed predecessors. The plants that relied on the tree's shade can either adapt or be removed, and new cultivars can take their place. New trees can be planted for future generations. In time, the log can become host to moss and mushrooms, will eventually become a topographic fixture of the garden upon which new creatures will live and thrive. In other words, it can be beautiful again, but only if we acknowledge that it will never be the same. The gardener who obstinately toils as if the shade was still there and the fallen log wasn't, will waste their time planting bushes that will burn in the sun, will prune the gnarled fingers of dead rose bushes, or coppice the new stump hoping it will return exactly as it was. Grief is not a homogeneous process, and the 5 stages of grief are an utter lie. Every person will grieve over each loss they have differently. Some people will need to talk to their loved ones about it, talk to everyone about it. Others will need to be left in quiet contemplation, Some will be sad, others angry, many disbelieving, some relieved that at least it's over now. Some people will need to wallow in their misery and others to escape from that wallowing. Some to be solemn and others to crack jokes about it. For some, tending to the garden of their loss will require a frantic effort right at the start, after which things will settle down. And others will need to tend to the situation regularly, yearly or weekly or even daily. Some will need to be witnessed or use their grief to power something that in some way heals the world in compensation. Some was nothing of the sort. For some, the pain will fade gradually, though not completely, over time. And for others, it will spike up at various moments throughout their lives. All of these and many others besides are valid forms of grief. And indeed, many people will need many of those things at different times as the nature of their loss changes. The one thing all those people need is support from others. And that support can involve, well, any number of things really. But even those who wish to grieve alone still need things, deserve things from us. There are few things more disturbing to a struggling gardener than for their neighbors to insist the tree has not fallen, or that it'll grow back, or that the log will be moved soon and everything will be fine. This is for at least two reasons. First, it makes the gardener question their own grip on reality. They see with their own eyes that the tree has fallen and everything has changed, and yet all the people they care about are insisting quite the opposite. Human beings are such profoundly social creatures that this disagreement between our own observations and the perception of others can cause immense turmoil. After all, if the gardener doesn't suppress their own sense of hurt, they risk being ostracized by those around them. Second, it says in no uncertain terms that a gardener is alone, that they're experiencing this moment of great tragedy exactly when they need their community the most, and yet that community has turned away, which means it is up to the gardener alone to endure it. And there are very few things more terrifying to a human being than to be alone in a time of need. Our society fails us in contending with grief, but that doesn't mean we have to fail each other. We can support each other in the world that follows. To do so, we must acknowledge that this is how loss operates, and that we must reach out to each other in honest curiosity and empathy, both when we are grieving and wishing to help. And as we reach out, we must follow the lead of the one who grieves, for it is their garden that needs tending, their soul which will tell them how it must be rearranged. And we must reach out not once, not a dozen times, but over and over and over. We must remind those who are lost in their loss that they still matter, that we are holding a space for them to return whenever they're ready, in whatever form they have taken in the world that follows. When possible, we should offer material support to ease the mundane burdens of their life, that they can devote more energy to their garden. But always we must follow their lead and believe them when they tell us through their words and actions what it is they need. As part of this, I think we need a ritual. We need some communal means of acknowledging the losses that our people still carry in their hearts, to reaffirm that they are real and that they matter and that it's okay they still live within us. A ritual where people can be seen in the way that they wish and which doesn't sublimate their loss into a heroic journey or some notion of a cycle of death and rebirth. There are cycles in the universe that spin round and round, but so too are there events that begin, carry forward, and eventually end, leaving something fundamentally different in their wake. Cyclical thinking is useful. It's an important part of human spirituality. But so too is the rupture, the thing once done that can never be undone. Whatever form that ritual takes, it must have the courage to look the suffering in the eyes and say, your pain is real, it matters, and I will be here beside you wherever it may take us. Only then can the garden thrive and the world be at peace. May we make it so. Amen.
Amen.